Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Career Confidence Corner. My name is Gina Alexandris, and I'm a legal career coach. Through these regular videos, my goal is to offer professionals the skills, knowledge, and confidence to create the career that you long for. So in this video, we're talking about something I really enjoy. We're talking about what you need to know to effectively document and highlight your experiences. All about resumes and cover letters. Some people feel really challenged by this process. I really get excited about resumes and cover letters because they're conversations that we can have about so many different elements of your skills and experiences. So effectively documenting and highlighting your experiences, what we're all about today, which is step 4 in the process of the Career Confidence Corner that we have so far. Whether you're a current law student looking for that summer or articling position, or you're an associate looking to switch into a different practice area or in different organization, or perhaps you're a lawyer making a switch out of practice to in-house or to a law adjacent role, these strategies apply to you and will help you succeed. In this video, we'll listen to and hear about 3 strategies that will help you effectively communicate your qualifications, your experience, and your interest to increase your chance of securing desired roles. And so just as we start, I'd want to remind us that for today, we're going to be looking at getting ready to document, and that includes gathering some information, doing some self-reflection, and then also doing a little bit of research. Second strategy is to select and maintain a professional and clear format. We'll talk about that. And the third thing is about highlighting your achievements, the impact that those achievements have, and your skills. Not everybody likes to do that, and so stay tuned. So let's recap before we begin from the videos from the last few months in the Career Confidence Corner, because each of those really is a stepping stone to the next. Step 1 was deeply reflecting and know yourself. And as you see, part of that's going to come back up again. The second step was clearly learning the legal landscape. That's a little bit about the research that we're going to ask you to do in this instance right now. The third thing is growing your professional community. And part of the reason that I wanted to get the growing your professional community done first before we talk about resumes and cover letters is because oftentimes what we find is that while of course you'll be applying to job postings many times in your career, there also are those hidden job markets, the times when you're meeting with somebody over a coffee or somebody calls you up and says, you know what, I've been thinking about you. We've got a role coming up or something that we're expecting. Wonder if you can send over your resume. You want to make sure that you have it available and you want to know what to expect. So those 3 previous videos, if you haven't seen them, walk on over to the YouTube channel and make sure that you take a look at them. And if you haven't subscribed to my YouTube channel to be getting more information as it becomes available, go to @Gina Alexandris Career Coach to get notified of updates. And now's the time to subscribe if you can. So ready to go. Let's get started with this first topic about getting ready to document. Gathering information, self-reflecting, and research. So what do we mean by that? Gathering the information, let's start with that. If you haven't already done so, let me just encourage you to have a document on your computer somewhere that is your master document, your key document, your big document, the full document, whatever you want to call it. And there, in an organized fashion, keep information about your school, your work, your volunteer, your training, your awards. Categorize them as such if you can, but have the information, the correct name of the school, the correct name of the award, the publication, perhaps a link to the publication, the dates from to whenever it is that you experience that position or the volunteer opportunity. I was given this recommendation as I was a young parent, and to any parents out there, both for yourself, but also for any young children, it's never too early to start creating this master list, if you will, for your children so that you can put down their softball games, their soccer awards, their chess tournaments, their grade 4, whatever it was, because you don't know when they're going to be applying for their first role. Give them that foundation to start with so that they can then have the information that they may have forgotten as they're moving forward in their own careers. But now it's about you. So let's make sure that we have that information for yourself. If you don't have it available in a organized fashion, now's the time to get that information. ensure that your dates and the names of employers, of schools and programs are correct. So double check, make sure that you have the correct, what they're correctly calling themselves as well. Build this document as your experiences grow. And by having all this information together in one source, it'll make the exercise of creating your resume and your cover letters that much easier. So you may not use everything that's on this in this document at all times. Likely you won't use it all, but you'll be able to mix and match, to add, to subtract, depending on what the opportunity and the role calls for. So gathering the information is stage one. Second stage is self-reflect on your goals. And we've kind of talked about this already in terms of that very, very first stage. I always come back to it. When you're in a transition, so whether you're looking for that summer role or an articling position or your first associate position or a new office to explore your talents in, or leaving law to do something else, at each of those stages, stop and reflect on your goals. Go back to that first video if you need to, and think about the strengths that you have, the gaps that you might need to satisfy somehow, the goals that you have, and the priorities that are important to you. This step will help you both focus on where you want to apply and also how you want to present yourself. So if you value a more flexible lifestyle, if you value a more relaxed approach, that might very well remind yourself, maybe these 4 employers are not where I want to apply to. Maybe I do want to look at these 3 employers instead. Being able to remind yourself of your values at any given stage in time is really, really critical, including in getting the documents ready to apply for those roles. It'll also help you fight that imposter syndrome. And what do I mean by that? Oftentimes, as we go through this exercise of gathering the information, allowing us to self-reflect on our goals, we'll remind ourselves of the things that really, really matter to ourselves. And we'll be able to also see we have a lot of strengths. We have the purpose of being someplace. We really do belong in the roles that we are applying to. And being able to acknowledge and then just look past the imposter syndrome is really critical, I think, and part of the reason why we want to self-reflect on your goals. As one person has noted in a convocation address one time, imposter syndrome really isn't an imposter syndrome. Really, it is you feeling uncomfortable at a table or in an organization or at an event that you're at. And it might be that you're uncomfortable because of specific reasons. Others may not look like you or have the same kind of training as you, and that's okay. Why is it that you want to join that table? Why is it that you want to join that organization? Think about what those goals are, and then you'll be able to ensure that you position yourself in writing through your cover letter and your resumes in as persuasive a way as possible. And I love this reminder from a source that I'm going to mention a little bit later on, the University of Ottawa Faculty of Law. So shout out to them. They put together this great guide. I'm going to give you the link in a bit. But they reference the following. They have a reminder in that guide that cover letters and resumes are incredibly personal documents. And that includes what and how you want to highlight. And you can't do that if you haven't really gone on that self-reflection piece. So the third area that I want to talk about in this getting ready to document, the getting ready stages, we're in the prep stage still, is researching your audience. Now, many of you have already done that because you have had some networking or growing your community beforehand. But if you're doing it now for the first time potentially, and you are researching your audience so that you have a sense of who it is that you're applying to and what it is that they're all about, it helps you with your self-reflection once you've done this research, but it also helps you think about the language and the tone that you're going to use in your materials. Again, what are the messages or the language or the mission that is being repeatedly, perhaps in various ways, but oftentimes in very similar ways, what's showing up on the employer's website? What kind of themes come up? Are they client driven? Are they entrepreneurial? Are they collegial? Are they award winning? What are the types of words that they're using to describe themselves, and how does that impact how and what you want to put in your materials. So keep notes of that information as well. Take notes or write it somewhere, perhaps in that same document that you created for your growing your professional community. Keep that, because even if you don't apply somewhere today or right now, it will come in handy at a later time, because I've oftentimes heard and seen and experienced a position that wasn't right or an organization that wasn't right for me at one stage definitely becomes an organization I'm interested in a year or 2 years or 3 years. So, like legal research, don't forget that if you take your notes now, you do need to note up, and I'll say you'll note up your information about employers as well, the research that you do about your employers. When you are actually ready to apply, if it's in a year, 2 years, 6 months, you'll do another cross check just to make sure that things that you had in mind are still relevant. So your prep stage is done. You've gathered your information, you've reflected on your goals and values and priorities, and you've done some research. Let's move to the next stage. Now you're going to select and maintain a professional and clear format. And this is really, really important, because while each document, of course, is extremely personal, and in ways you'd like to ensure that it reflects who you are and your personality, also remember the other side to that is that the legal community and the legal profession tends to be a little bit more professional, tends to be a little bit more conservative and traditional, and often relies on precedent. That's the profession that we're in. There's no good or bad necessarily in terms of selecting your format, but your resume and cover letter are probably not the best places to demonstrate your uniqueness and creativity, unless the organization or the role calls for it. So there are certain organizations that I'd say, yes, you want to probably be a little bit more creative than otherwise. However, I think given the legal profession's way of recruiting, there are certain things that, in terms of selecting your format, I'd want to suggest. And when I look here, the three areas that I talk about that we're going to look at with formatting is make sure it's clean, professional, and accurate. We'll talk about bullets and keywords to be using for your resume in particular, but then keywords applies to your cover letter, and also the whole concept of reverse chronological order, particularly for your resume. But I'll talk about the cover letter as well in a bit. The other thing I want to talk about is that some employers, some legal employers, whether it's the government, whether it's large legal organizations, whether it's in-house roles, they are using what's known as ATS, or applicant tracking systems, technology for recruitment. And they use it for a number of different reasons. So they're using it for consistency, to remove human error, perhaps, or human bias. They're using it for efficiency. It takes a lot of time to be able to manage recruitment processes. And given the number of applications that they receive, they also want to be efficient in that way in terms of the recruitment activities that they're engaged in. And so optimizing your resume and your cover letter, your materials for ATS, and also for humans, to be honest with you, is beneficial, including some simple formatting, because complex formats, and I've seen some creative resumes that have charts and graphics. They are great, but sometimes the technology can be confused by the graphics or by the complex format. So keep it simple is probably the best way. You can still keep it simple, clean, professional, and also use text-based content, not images or charts. Um, some things to consider specifically, and this is, I'll tell you if it's with regards to resumes and or cover letter. There, first of all, is no right or wrong. Whenever I meet with a client and we talk about their resume and their cover letter, the first thing that I say is there's no absolute right or absolute wrong way of doing something. There are a number of different suggestions that I'm going to put forward to you. You'll see in the guide that I'm going to share with you some other suggestions, but really you want to be able to know that there's certain better opportunities or better ways of doing something. There's no right or wrong. However, let's just talk about what might be effective and better. Use an easy to read font. Some of the stylistic fonts can be very lovely, but they can be very difficult to read. The flowing fonts, for example, or the curving fonts might lend themselves to a novel or to some other document you're preparing, not necessarily to a resume or cover letter. Use a crisp, clean font, whether it's Arial or other such, and make sure that the font size is an easy to read 11 or a 12. I know that people, to try and get as much as they can onto their materials, go down to a 10. I know you can enlarge things using technology, but if you happen to have somebody who's printing something off, you don't want to be down at a 10. It looks too cluttered and too busy. Speaking of which, leave as much white space as you possibly can. So again, if you've got too much, take a look at how you're going to edit it. You want to make sure that there's enough white space around the content and between the content that it flows more easily for the eye. Generally, and I'm going to say generally, resume should be no longer than 2 pages. And again, double spaced or single spaced, it depends on the formatting, but 2 pages maximum with some exceptions. If you're applying to some markets like the New York bar, they want 1 page only. So a New York resume is going to be a 1 page resume, especially in the early years. If you're also a more senior associate or a partner who's applying with many, many years experience, of course, the organization might very well expect a CV from you, a curriculum vitae that is longer than 2 pages. So you can add a third, perhaps, or a fourth page. Standard go-to, though, for most people is a 2 page document. So try and keep it to 2 pages. And the cover letter, subject to the exceptions that I mentioned earlier of experience and role, typically a cover letter will be a single page, and that is single space. So you don't have to worry about double spacing your cover letter. So 2 pages max for your resume, 1 page for your cover letter. Start with a header. And I often say a header is really important. And as you've seen here, for example, I've used a typical blue bar with some language as my, if you will, header for this presentation. But a header that has, and I'll explain the content, a header that is the same or similar should be used for your cover letter and your resume. They're both part of the packages that you're going to submit. So think about them in a consistent way. What should the header include? Very typical, your name with pronouns if you wish, an email address, and make sure it's a professional email. If you haven't updated your Gmail address that you were using for your baseball team, for example, or that you're using for fun back in high school, now's the time to get another Gmail address or use one of the school email addresses that you have. But make sure it's a clean and professional sounding email address, your cell number with the area code, of course, a LinkedIn profile link. It's not required, but more and more people are including links to their LinkedIn profile if it's available. And we'll talk about that at another time, but I always think that it's a good thing to have a LinkedIn profile available. If you have a professional website or a portfolio of some sort, link to that as well in your header. And then a home address. And less and less as people are communicating by email or other such sources, a full address is not necessarily seen as a requirement. I still do recommend it. If you are looking to apply to an organization, for example, and there's an issue with distance or there's an issue where you're concerned about any interpretation that be made because of your address. You live in the eastern part of the province and you're applying to the western part of the province, and you're going to explain that in your cover letter. That might be a situation where you're not necessarily including the address. So people can be in contact with you through your cell phone and through your email. So hopefully you'll think about, again, through your research, whether or not you need to add a home address. No personal information. So you don't need your date of birth. You don't need anything about your parents. And I know I've seen some resumes that include a host of personal information and a photo that is not expected and typically not accepted here in the legal market within Ontario, within Canada. So ensure that there's no personal information such as your date of birth, definitely not your SIN. And I also think for associates, while it might be easily available, you don't need to include your Law Society number in your materials. Leave that for the time being. There's no need to include an LSO number. In terms of accuracy, and that's both regarding dates, names, roles, as well as spelling and format. Ensure that you proofread both documents very carefully. I want to highlight that again, and that's why I also added the word accurate to this issue of selecting your format. both in terms of the formatting, and I've seen people whose lines have gone over, or who use periods at the end of some sentences and not at others, or who use multiple italics and bold in their headings and they're off, or who don't realize that when they convert something to a PDF, the PDF is 3 pages versus the original 2. Ensure that you take a look at the formatting, ensure there are no typographical or grammar errors, and ensure that the substance is correct. So that if you're saying, one of the things that I've seen, for example, as you've been creating that original list, you've got all your dates there. If there's something that has an overlap, is it intended in terms of dates? Did you really have 2 jobs, or were at school plus something else while you were volunteering? Make sure the accuracy is there. And that goes to the names of the organizations and the roles that you had as well. As I mentioned, most organizations will expect a PDF version. And so most of you are going to do your document on a Word version or on a Pages version. And that is absolutely okay. Sometimes you'll be able to upload that. Most will want it as a PDF. So convert your document to a PDF, but make sure that you've printed off to see that there are no formatting issues when you've done the conversion. And on that point, when you do upload a document or send it to somebody, make sure that the naming convention that you have, the file name that you have for your documents, is just like with your email, a professional email. So it could be Gina Alexandris resume, Gina Alexandris cover letter. Instead of V1, V2, old resume, new resume, make sure that it is a clear, professional, crisp name, because when you attach it, they're going to see the name of it. Or if you upload it, they'll see what you've named it. So it sounds like such a small thing, but the naming convention for your file is equally as important. And again, it says something about your attention to detail, your care in your materials, and in your pride in how you present yourself. So PDF is fine. For cover letters, let me come back just to cover letters for a minute. Remember, this is a business document. And so if you have never had to prepare or draft a formal business letter, look up what it requires. I'm going to show you a sample in a second. Look up what it requires so you ensure that you have the different components. We've talked about the header at the very top, so that it mirrors or is very similar to the header in your resume. But then your cover letter should also include a date. Typically, I say put it over to the right-hand side, in line with the first line of your organization's name, so you can save some space, but it should have the date. It should have the organization that you're applying to, the name and address. Sometimes you don't need the address for the exact reasons that I talked about address as in other things, as well as specific person and their role that you are sending it to. If you have that person in the salutation, include their name. And unless you know them really well, don't go with their first name. So it's Dear Mr. or Dear Ms. MS, or Dear MX if that's how they are referring to themselves, or Dear Hiring Committee or Dear Recruiting Committee. So ensure that you have a salutation, and then underneath the salutation would be a reline regarding application for third-year associate position, third-year real estate lawyer position, 2L summer position, 2025, or whatever the case is. Ensure that you have a reline, and then you'll start with your document. And the Ottawa Guide on page 21 has a really great confirmation of what that looks like. And I'm going to try and share it very briefly with you here. As you can see it, give me 2 seconds as I'll go to page 21 in a moment. For some reason, it's not showing up, and I had it all ready to go, but I will share it with you towards the end of it. But the page 21, make reference to page 21 of the Ottawa Guide, because it's very, very helpful to see what the heading and the opening is like. And then paragraph 1 is your introduction. Paragraphs 2 and 3 are your 2 body paragraphs. And then the 4th paragraph is your closing, and always with a sign off, sincerely, and your name. So cover letters are your business document, the first document sometimes that they will see before they actually get your resume. If you're not uploading a cover letter because it's not required and just sending an email, think about it being a professional email with elements of what we just discussed as well. And when I talk about cover letters and resumes, the other thing that I wanted to say very quickly about the format and making sure it's accurate, you might use something from a guide. You might use a template that a friend sends you, but please, please, please ensure that you haven't just cut and pasted their work or their information or their language. You are actually changing it. You're using it as a guide only. I say that only because I've seen it and I've experienced it where I've gotten something and it's referencing one employer, but then the type of work that they're referencing in the second part, when we get to bullets and keywords, is completely different from what you'd expect that employer to have. And it becomes obvious that they cut and pasted from a different source and weren't careful to correct it. So keep that in mind as you're thinking about the accuracy of your resume and your cover letter. Bullets and keywords. So a few things. First of all, as I've mentioned before, in terms of accuracy, ensure that these are properly formatted. They're aligned. They have the correct length. They are bold or italicized consistently. For legal resumes, the typical categories that you would use are the following. I don't think you need a summary paragraph or summary category at the very top. Some people really like to do that. If you have enough space in your resume, by all means, you can include it. I always think that your cover letter offers you the opportunity to highlight your experiences and the skills and strengths that you bring. Typically, what I would see in a resume in particular are the following: an education section. And this section for education might move after your experience if you are senior associate or if you've got enough work experience. It might just well be that at that point, your education and the next part that I'm going to talk about becomes less of a priority than what your professional experience is. So most people start off with education at the top, and you'll include everything back to your university. Do not go as far back as high school, no matter how recently that may have been. Your education section will include particular master's programs, PhDs, law school. You can include any summer experiences abroad if you need to. There will be some things that you decide not to include, but the education section usually goes first unless you've had more experience and it becomes something that you move to later on. Certification and licenses. I've oftentimes seen licensing and education combined as one, especially for those who are already lawyers and are moving into the profession in different roles within the profession. So you can combine licensing and education, and this is where you would include your calls to the bar, call to the bar Ontario, and the date or year, call to the bar in. If you've got a New York call or an India call, you would include that reference as well. Many people who are applying, who have just finished articling and are applying for new associate roles, sometimes forget that they are or will be called to the bar very soon. Make sure that you include that element. So after your education and licensing, the next thing to include is professional experience. And in this, you could either separate it to law-related experience and other experience. So many people tell me that they have concerns that, their soccer coaching, for example, that they did in university may not be relevant or considered law-related or professional experience, and they want to separate that. That's okay. You could do so. It doesn't have to be. You could either keep one as an experience section or professional experience or relevant professional experience, and either eliminate if you've got too much or move to a later section any other experience that you have. So experience is this section. How exactly you label it is something that it'll depend on the self-awareness that you've done, the self-reflection rather, and the research that you've done. So education, certifications and licenses, professional experience, and the next categories that, before I go to the next categories, under professional experience, make sure here to include the job or title, the organization, the name of it correctly, the location if it's been somewhere outside of the jurisdiction, and then the month and year to the month and year. And typically, if it's to present, you'll put the starting month and year to present. One comment that I've seen and that I make oftentimes, choose a format for the month and the year and stick with it. So if you're using 3 letters for, APR to be April, MAY to be May, use 3 letters consistently. If you're writing out the full month, use that consistently. Sometimes your format or your space that you have will determine how you do that. So the categories that are then after professional experience include, and you might have some of these or none of these, professional affiliations, for example, the OBA, FACL, student groups that you're a part of, publications and presentations and or awards. Awards I've also seen included if it's a school award within the school, just underneath it as a separate bullet. Publications, again, if it comes from a particular role that you did, whether in school or in a job, it might go as a bullet underneath that particular category, or you might have them listed separately if you've got a number of them. And if you have a position that you're applying to for which publications and presentations is a key skill that they look at, we'll come to that in the next topic, then by all means include that as a separate section. Your volunteer experience, and depending on how much you have in the other elements that we've discussed, you may just have the organization, your role, and the date, or you might have, if you've done something very active within the organization as part of your volunteer, you might have a bullet to explain what that is. Languages, English should be assumed, and if you're applying to a French role, French should be assumed. So here really include any other languages that you are fluent in. It's not a requirement. Sometimes languages are expected or required in a job. Additional languages are expected in a particular job application. So do set it separately, or you can include it under additional information. If you have a space for 2 lines for additional information, I always like to suggest that people use those 2 lines to include creative or sports skills that you might have, special hobbies that you might have. Here's where you can bring in your uniqueness, just to sort of be able to share a little bit of yourself and what really motivates you outside of work for the employer to take a look at. My one caution would be, if it's on your resume, be prepared to talk about it. So if you say that you are a food connoisseur, what's been the recent restaurant that you've gone to, or what's your favorite food? If you say I'm a book lover, well, what's the last book that you read, and be able to talk about it. So if it's on your resume, be ready to talk about it. And about the bullets and keywords in particular, the one thing that I'll say, never start a bullet or never use with I or me. If you can run a word check in your document to see if you have I or we or me, and eliminate it, reword the sentence. Always try and start off the bullets with an active verb. The guide that I've mentioned certainly has a couple of pages of active verbs. If you Google resume active words to look, you'll find a host of them. Think about what it is that you're doing. Think about the information that you have, and then think about what you needed to do, and put that in as your active verb to start. So for example, when you're thinking about legal positions, oftentimes some of the key legal positions or legal verbs include researched, wrote, drafted, litigated, appeared, managed, facilitated, engaged in, interviewed. Those are some of the key skills that oftentimes come up in roles that you want to see if you in fact have that in, whether it's a legal role or otherwise, being able to incorporate that in your bullets. The other thing that I'll say, and we're going to come back to the bullets in a few moments and keywords, but the order should be reverse chronological order. So your most recent education, your most recent professional experience, your most recent professional affiliations or clubs, it should go in reverse chronological order. So the most recent first and then go backwards. And some of the things you will decide, if you're going to keep it to 2 pages, will not make it from your master file into your resume, depending on what the job is, depending on what the expectations are. It may not mean that you include everything, even if it is post high school or even post university. It may not make it onto this application because there's so much else that you might have going on. If you're worried that you don't have enough, again, are you being as descriptive about the activities that you've done as you can be? And we'll talk about that in a second. The other thing that I'd say about the format in particular and the reverse chronological order, the current things that you're doing. So if you're currently in a role or if you are currently in a volunteer activity, make sure that those are present tense. So engage, research, interview, or you can add the ing, engaging, researching, interviewing, for example. All other roles that you are no longer involved in should all be in the past tense. So researched, interviewed, engaged, those should all be past tense. And the other thing to think about with your format are gaps in your experience, whether you took a gap year, whether you were on parental or other care leave. Do you include something or do you not include something in it? If you don't include something in it, you may either want to address it in your cover letter or be prepared for somebody to ask you about it. So how you handle gaps really does depend on what that gap was for and how comfortable you are. Perhaps you were sick for a period of time. What do you say about that gap? And again, those are things that I'm always happy to talk to people about if they're trying to figure things out. So in the materials, I've got the link for you in terms of this guide, the resume and cover letter guide. There's many other ones in your university, probably your law school may have very well have had one. I always find that this public guide from U of Ottawa Law is really helpful. Great samples to use as a guide only, as I said, and the link is available. If you typically, if you type in resume and cover letter guide, Ottawa Faculty of Law, you'll be able to find it. And they have that reminder about don't copy the language in these examples word for word. Make sure that you craft your resume to reflect your own writing style and make sure that it is your own information that you include. So let's go to the third area, highlighting your achievements, impact, and skills. And here I'm going to speak to everyone, including and especially those who feel that they feel shy or they feel that they don't want to boast or they feel that they can't really share some of their achievements or impact. It doesn't feel right to do so. This is not the place where you want to hold back. You want to be able to put down truths, you want to be able to put down evidence, you want to be able to put down details, you want to be able to highlight the picture of what you have done, what you can bring into a particular role. This part, I understand the body of the resume and the body of the cover letter are typically the hardest parts of these two documents that anybody will write. And that's why it's important as you're thinking through it to prepare yourself, to leave yourself enough time. Make sure that you have enough time so that you could feel confident that you have highlighted and included everything that you need to include when you are preparing your materials. If you haven't done the self-reflection piece, this might be a little bit harder. So step back, go back, re-loop to the self-reflection, and come back and prepare this resume material. So in terms of detailing responsibilities, if you haven't kept track of the roles that you've had, try and recreate them, of course, with what you were expected to do. Sometimes it's a little bit harder. But if you have job descriptions from that role still potentially, either the job ad or job description, or you have performance reviews from the past roles, or if you kept track, so for lawyers, if you've got the dockets from what you did, look back at those and include some of that in your original draft so you can think about what it is that you can detail. With those keywords that we talked about, those active verbs at the very beginning, detail the responsibilities. And depending on how recent and how relevant it is, you can either have 5, 6, 10 bullets under each role, or you might have 2 or 3 only. My earlier roles, for example, I'll only have 1 or 2 bullets, but the more recent ones, I might have 6 to 10 bullets, depending on what the role is that I'm applying for. So you want to ensure that the responsibilities that you held are accurately reflected and detailed. Where you can, quantify the results. So what do I mean by that? In terms of quantifying the results, some people feel here in particular that they're bragging. But if you actually did grow a particular family practice from 10 clients to 100 clients, that's a great number to include. If you worked on multi-million-dollar closings, include that information. If you built a volunteer organization and grew it to have donations of X dollars or participants in the range of whatever it might be, include that information just to be able to understand, if you're a reader, what that impact was in the role that you were in. And then, of course, the last part is to connect achievements to the job requirements. So first of all, and I oftentimes have to remind people and my clients to do this, look at the job description, have it with you. You know, if you have split screens, have that on the one side, or print it off and highlight what the job is saying are the requirements. And then think about how you have demonstrated those, how you have highlighted them in your resume and or in your cover letter. You need to ensure both for the ATS that we talked about earlier, the tracking systems, or even for human readers, that the job requirement is actually reflected in your resume and cover letter. And some of you might be sitting there thinking, yeah, but I've not done this role before. I really don't have the job requirements. Two comments. First of all, many people, typically more women, will read a job description and say, I don't have 70%, I only have 70% of the skills, and they'll hold back in applying. Whereas some people will say, I've got 70% of the skills. I'll learn the other 30 because I know I'm talented and capable and I'm going to apply. Don't not apply just because you don't have all of the job requirements. Secondly, and related to this, think about what transferable skills you do have and think about where you might be able to, in fact, use a skill that you had in the past to apply it and to grow it in a particular job description. I oftentimes tell people who've been in the service industry, for example, working in a restaurant or in a bar where you are meeting with people and juggling different priorities and having to be able to speak professionally and be able to keep a lot of things that you're remembering. That takes a lot, and that's applicable to the service industry that we are in, called the legal profession. So don't discount the ability to make the link between those achievements that you've had with the current job descriptions that might be in an unrelated field that you're looking to get into. Um, it's also important both for the resume as well as with the cover letter to make that connection. So not just in the resume and in the bullets, but in your cover letter as well. And for the cover letter, what I always would recommend is where you can, and this is a little bit hard and will take that time that you need, think about telling a story. What is your story that you're trying to communicate to the employer? What themes or theme arises based on your experience and your goals that you have? Instead of just writing, I did this and I did that, tell them why it was important. Tell them what it means to the future you, to the future professional that you are intending on being, or what it meant to the community that you were a part of. So trying to tell that story, and especially where you have a few different examples of that theme, is really important in a cover letter. The only other thing that I'll say about connecting achievements to job requirements is that it does come up both in the cover letter and in the resume. When ATS is looking for keywords, they're looking to see that they find, and this is either ATS, so technology, or humans, they want to see that you have addressed the various the various job expectations in the job description in your written material. Couple of other points, and we're going to wrap up really soon. Some other things that sometimes come up, and I'm not going to spend too much time on these. Additional items in terms of crafting your written materials, writing samples, usually just for students, but even later on for some associate roles. People will ask for a writing sample. They want to see original pieces of work that you have done. Most people will go back to their student years and pull out a piece of work that they have done as an essay, a research paper, maybe they did a master's thesis, and offer that as their writing sample. Others who have written blogs or who have written reports or who have written research papers for conferences can provide those as samples. Make sure there's nothing confidential, of course, on whatever it is that you're providing. Reference list, you certainly do not need to include references in your resume. If somebody asks for a reference list after they've had an interview with you, then you can provide them with a reference list. I typically don't offer a reference list or don't recommend offering a reference list right from the get-go. So keep a reference list handy. Please make sure that you have done two things. One, asked or informed the person that's on your list or the people that are on your list that you have listed them and that they would still be willing to offer you a positive letter, a positive reference, and make sure you have their current contact information. A deal sheet. What do I mean by a deal sheet? Many of you who are in corporate commercial work are working on various deals that you'd like to be able to explain to a next employer what kind of work that you are doing. So a deal sheet can include information such as if it's public, the name of the organization, depending, and this is where you need to exercise judgment or speak to somebody if you're not sure, the type of work that you did on this deal. If there's a dollar value, go back to that quantification. If you can quantify it, by all means. And if there's something about the date. So did you work on it this year? Did you work on it last year? Did it take a long time for you to deal with this? So a deal sheet is something that I've oftentimes seen and will encourage as a separate document to their resume and cover letter. And social media include that only because social media, whether you're on it or not, it isn't, if you're on it, rather, it is a place where your writing is seen, your tone is demonstrated, your priorities are demonstrated. And so just as I suggested you take great care with proofreading and with tone and with doing some research about who your audience is in your resume and cover letter, same really does apply for social media. And I'll also say the following. I did hear recently I was having a conversation with a senior member of the profession who acknowledged and accepted that they do look on social media when they're looking up possible applicants, and that could be potentially to see, are you careful in terms of how you present? Or when I say careful, I mean is the writing sloppy? Are there grammatical errors, for example? Do you still have pictures of you? If it's a private picture, please try and do it privately in terms of, the activities that you have over the weekend. If you're going to be out drinking on a weekend, that's not something necessarily that a future employer wants to see. So be mindful of what your social media presence looks like, and ensure that you make efforts to curate that and to cultivate that appropriately as well. So I think this is meant to be short, and I hope it's been of help and of use. I'll put the link to the guide in the uh, space below. But right now, in summary, in terms of the topic that we had right now, thinking about what is important for you to be able to do to successfully land that job that you want, I want you to ensure that you think about and understand what your goals are and what the goals of your audience or the reader is. So the organization or the employer, the single employer, or the hiring person in the organization that you're looking at. I want you to think about how to create the written documents that you can submit that are effective, that are clear, that are professional, and they communicate your intentions and experiences, and that you can be proud to hand over to them. I want you to demonstrate your skills and achievements in a meaningful and persuasive way. And sometimes that means overcoming the hesitation to talk about yourself. And sometimes it means overcoming the hesitation to highlight and showcase the tremendous work that you have done. And that takes a little bit of work as well. And so being able to understand and appreciate that you want to put yourself and your best foot forward is absolutely necessary. I oftentimes remind my clients and former students, think about this as a case. You are trying to provide the best evidence to the judge, the employer, of why they should hire you. And so you want to put your best foot forward. You don't want to be boastful. That's very, very different from persuasive and from clear and from professional. So I hope that this has been of help to you as you move forward in this phase. I thank you for joining me in this video. And if you want to stay in touch, I have multiple ways that you can stay in touch: LinkedIn, my website, my email address, and through this YouTube channel, Gina Alexander's Career Coach. Please feel free to subscribe and to get more information as it becomes available. And our next career confidence video that will be posted will be on skillfully navigating the job interview process. Thanks very much to everybody, and I hope you have a very successful application process. Bye now.